Welcome to StoryModeOn. Grab a snack and settle in. This one's called The Night Patrol. Leo's key turned in Ruth Calloway's front lock at 9:06, 6 minutes late because he'd stopped for gas and told himself the shift was still salvageable. The bungalow smelled of radiator heat and lilac lotion, dry November air sitting on top of both. His work phone was already in his hand before his coat was off. Ruth was awake. She sat upright in the hospital bed they'd pushed against the living room wall, both hands white on the rail. Her nightgown was buttoned wrong, one collar folded under. Her eyes found him and didn't let go. "Leo," she said, as if he'd been gone years. "I'm here." He hung his coat on the hook by the door. Third overnight with her. The first two had been quiet. Chamomile, vitals, the television low on a game show she didn't watch. He'd written the same note twice. Client restless at bedtime, settled with reassurance. Easy shifts, the kind that made you forget you were in someone's house at all. Tonight the house felt awake. "It's in the wardrobe again." He glanced at the hall. The spare bedroom door stood open 3 inches, black inside. A wedding photo hung crooked on the wallpaper. Bride and groom turned face to the wall. He'd noticed that on his first shift and hadn't asked about it. "What's in the wardrobe, Ruth?" She swallowed. Her throat worked like she was trying to spit out a word that wouldn't fit. "Something that waits." Leo's thumb hovered over the app. Denise had written on his first week, "Validate feelings. Do not reinforce delusions. Redirect to a safe topic. Document behavior." He could offer water. Suggest the television. He could do all of that and still be gone from her fear by 9:15. Shift unblemished, manual followed. Ruth's knuckles were bloodless on the rail. A tremor ran through her forearms. He put the phone in his bag. "Show me," he said. She didn't move at first. Then her feet found the floor, slippers on the wrong feet, and she gripped his forearm hard enough that he'd feel it tomorrow. The spare room was colder than the rest of the house. Ruth stayed in the hall with one hand on the door frame, breathing fast through her nose. Leo clicked on his flashlight. The beam slid over a narrow bed with a crocheted throw, a chair with a folded housecoat, the wardrobe with swollen doors that didn't quite meet in the middle. He felt ridiculous. 28 years old, Meridian Home health badge in his bag, about to negotiate with furniture. He opened the wardrobe. Hangers clicked. A mothball smell rose up, sharp and old. A Sunday coat hung at the end, navy wool, sleeves empty, shoes on the floor, nothing breathing, nothing watching. The dark at the back was only dark. Ruth made a small sound in her throat. Leo swept the flashlight once more under the bed, along the baseboard, across the empty walls. Dust motes spun in the beam. The radiator knocked and the bedskirt shivered once against the floor. He crouched low enough that his knee complained and looked into the shallow space where nothing lived except a lost sock and a flat penny. He didn't know when that had become part of the job. His face was hot anyway. Ruth watched from the hall with her hand still on the door frame, and he wanted, absurdly, to do it right for her. Not for Denise, not for the portal, not for Paul listening from Denver. On the way back he reached into the kitchen without asking, and took a wooden spoon from the drawer by the stove. Ruth had told the day aide she'd chased a raccoon off the porch with it last spring. He didn't know why he believed that story. He believed it anyway. He set the spoon on the spare room pillow like a sentry. "Gone now," Ruth whispered. "Gone now," he said. She repeated it once more, softer, and some tight thing in her chest loosened. Her fingers eased on his arm. He walked her to the living room chair and wrapped the throw from the couch around her knees. For 11 minutes she drank half a cup of chamomile while the radiator knocked. Leo logged vitals on the work phone with the screen angled away from her. Pulse 104. Coming down. Blood pressure acceptable. He told himself that was the job. Numbers in boxes. 6:45 in the morning he'd hand off to the day aide and drive home in grey light. Ruth's eyes stayed on the hall. At 11:42, the house phone blinked on the kitchen wall. Ruth had fallen into a doze with the cup still cradled in both hands. Leo moved it to the side table, careful not to clink the saucer, and pressed play on the answering machine. Paul Calloway's voice filled the kitchen. Careful. Tired. Denver in every careful pause. Mom, it's Paul. Ruthie, I mean. I spoke to Dr. Patel. She said the night agitation might be the new medication, but she also said the aide shouldn't encourage the wardrobe thing. It scares her more later. Please don't. Paper rustling. A breath held too long. Leo, if you're there, just redirect her. That's what they said works. We talked about this. Okay. Love you, Mom. The message beeped off. Leo stood with his hand still on the phone. Encourage. As if Ruth had invented a hobby. As if fear were a story you could starve by refusing to feed it. He opened the care portal on his work phone. Cursor blinking in the behavior field. Client expressed fear regarding spare bedroom. Redirect attempted. He typed nothing. The screen dimmed against his thumb. When he came back to the living room, Ruth was awake. She'd followed the sound of her son's voice down the hall on bare slipper heels. Paul? She asked. He called. Is he coming? No. Her face folded in a way that had nothing to do with wardrobes. For a second she was only a mother who hadn't been visited. Leo had seen Paul's car in the driveway twice in 3 months of shifts. Both times Paul had moved through the house like a man checking smoke detectors, efficient and afraid of staying too long. Then Ruth saw Leo's bag on the chair where he'd left the phone inside, screen down, and her whole body went rigid. You don't believe me? I didn't say that. You put it away. She meant the phone. She meant the manual. She meant every person who had ever patted her hand and gone back to the kitchen. Leo opened his mouth to explain validation and redirection and the difference between feelings and facts. The words tasted like Paul's voicemail. Ruth turned before he could arrange them and walked toward the spare room, fast for a woman of 86, the throw slipping off her shoulders. He caught up in the hall. She had both palms flat on the spare room door, pushing it shut as if something on the other side were leaning back. Ruth, he kept his voice low, I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him then, not at the wardrobe, at him. Her eyes were wet and furious. Then check it, she said. He checked it. Empty hangers, mothballs, the spoon still on the pillow. Ruth sagged against him when he came out, just long enough that he felt the weight of her. He heated soup at midnight because the chart said, offer nutrition. Tomato. She used to like tomato. The can opened a bit with a sound that seemed too loud. Ruth sat at the kitchen table and stared at the spoon he put in her hand without lifting it. I'm not hungry when he's in the house, she said. He's not in the house. You said so. The lie sat between them. He had said it because the manual preferred clean sentences. Ruth looked at the hall as if Frank might step out of the spare room to prove him wrong. He carried the tray to the living room. She followed. He checked her blood pressure in the bedroom alcove, cuffed tight on her thin arm. Numbers acceptable, meaning nothing. She followed. He rinsed the mug in the sink and watched his own reflection in the window above the faucet. A man in a company polo shirt who hadn't slept enough to trust himself. She stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself, slippers whispering on the linoleum, soup cooling on the counter where he'd abandoned it. A skin had formed on top. Orange and still. The clock on the microwave said 2:03. His eyes burned. His back ached from standing too carefully, as if good posture could substitute for sleep. He had checked the wardrobe once. It had not been enough. His training module played in his head on a loop. Do not reinforce. Do not reinforce. He could text Denise. Standard protocol for escalating agitation. She would be kind. She would also write it down. Paul would get a call. The wardrobe would become a problem with a paper trail. Ruth stood in the spare room doorway, shaking. Leo, she said. Leo, please. He chose the spoon instead of the phone. The second patrol felt different. The room was the same size. The wardrobe was the same cheap wood with a chip in the left door, where it had caught on something years ago. His embarrassment was gone, burned off, replaced by something uglier and more useful. He knelt on the rug. The fibers scratched through his jeans. Gone now, he said to the open wardrobe. Ruth echoed him from the hall. Gone now. Gone now. Her voice broke on the second pass. He stood to leave. The house creaked. Ruth flinched hard enough that the door frame shook under her hand. Frank, she said. The name landed in his stomach. Leo looked at the wedding photo in the hall, faces to the wall. Ruth's husband, dead 12 years. Drank, yelled. Things the day log mentioned only as family history, never as weather in the house. Frank's in there, Ruth whispered. He always hid in there when he was sorry. When he was done being sorry, he came out. Leo remembered the day log note in passing. Client agitated after mention of deceased spouse. As if deceased were a fence you could put around a name. Leo's throat tightened. The urge rose fast and mean. Say there's nothing there. Say Frank is dead. Say she is confused and tired and making it worse. Correct her. Free himself. Go back to vitals and chart notes and the grey life where fear was a checkbox you could clear and forget. He almost said it. He felt the sentence form behind his teeth, sharp and true and useless. Ruth's hand found his sleeve and shook so hard it shook him too. He knelt again. The wardrobe door was still open. Dark mouth. Hangers like ribs. The Sunday coat smelled of mothballs and another decade. Frank, Leo said. Not to Ruth. To the room. His voice came out low and ridiculous and sincere, because if it didn't, she would know. You don't live here anymore. Leave her alone. Nothing moved. He hadn't expected it to. That wasn't the point. He thought of Paul's voicemail. Redirect. Encourage. Words for people who needed the hallway to stay simple. Ruth's fingers dug into his sleeve like she was falling and had chosen him as the railing. Gone now, he said. Gone now, Ruth breathed. He told the dark to leave again. Again. He tapped the wooden spoon against the door frame the way you might scare an animal off a porch. He looked into the back of the wardrobe where the light didn't reach and spoke to it as if something there had ears. His knees ached on the rug. The flashlight rolled against his hip, beam pointing at the ceiling, useless and bright. Somewhere in the house a pipe ticked. Ruth flinched anyway. Leo kept his eyes on the dark and said softer, She's not yours anymore. Ruth whispered with him until the words blurred together. Gone now, gone now, gone now. Her breath hitched, steadied, hitched again. At some point he stopped feeling foolish. That frightened him more than the dark. When he finally stood, her weight sagged against his shoulder. Not collapsed, settled, like a sack of flour finding the floor. He walked her back to the living room chair, and she went with him, trusting his arm in a way that made his eyes sting. She slept sitting up with her head against his jacket, which he draped over her without thinking. Her fingers stayed curled in the fabric at his wrist. Leo didn't move. The radiator knocked. The refrigerator cycled on. His left foot went numb. He shifted an inch, stopped when she murmured against his sleeve, and stayed. Once, years ago, before Meridian, before the training modules, he'd sat with his own grandmother through a night of confusion after a fall. He'd been embarrassed then too. He'd also been family, which meant nobody could write him up for holding her hand. Ruth smelled of lilac lotion and old soap. Her breathing slowed against his arm. The spare room door stayed visible from the chair, 3 inches open, dark and ordinary. Grey light crept through the blinds after 5. The porch timer clicked and the outside bulb went off. Ruth's breathing had evened into something deep and ordinary. Leo eased himself free inch by inch so he wouldn't wake her. The living room looked different in dawn. The hospital bed rail caught the grey and threw a thin line of light across the carpet. Ruth's hands had loosened in her lap. He let himself imagine she would wake clear-headed and thank him, then let the imagining go. In the kitchen he wrote the night log with the portal open on the table. Restless night. Responded to client distress. Client calmer after reassurance and room check. True enough for Denise, true enough for Paul. In the margin of his paper notebook, where the app couldn't see, he wrote, Gone now. He washed the spoon and put it back in the drawer by the stove. Ruth stirred once in the chair, mumbled a word that might have been his name or might have been nothing, and didn't wake. The day aide would arrive at 6:45. Ruth might ask about the wardrobe again. She might not remember his patrol at all. Leo found he didn't resent either outcome. Both were honest. Leo locked the front door from the inside, then stood on the porch with his bag and watched the street wake up. A man 2 houses down carried a bin to the curb. A porch light went off. Hartwell, Ohio, in November. ordinary as bread. He got in his car. The engine turned over on the second try. He drove home with the heat on and the radio off, seeing other people's windows lit and not looking away. That's it for the story. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more.